Hello, I'm William Buursma, one of the pastors at Third Christian Reformed Church here in the city of Kalamazoo. The program you're watching is called Markings. Our topic today strays just a bit from the specifically religious. We're going to be talking about the Berlin Wall, and we're going to ask the question, who pulled it down, and will it stay down? Now, we're not experts, of course, but we'd like to look at it somewhat from the viewpoint of the Christian faith. And so we hope you'll enjoy our discussion. I have with me two friends who've been on the program before. Father Molino particularly is a regular panelist, and Dr. Siebert has been here many times as well. But would you please introduce yourselves a moment?
Father Bob Molino from the Diocese of Kalamazoo.
Rudolf Siebert, Professor of Religion and Society at Western Michigan University.
I think we're all agreed that one of the most significant developments in recent months has been the turmoil in Eastern Europe. And in a sense, the sharpest focus of that comes in the fact that the Berlin Wall is no longer really there. It's physically there, but it's no longer there as it once was. And that's a tremendous thing. It's an event that probably nobody really expected that could ever occur without bloodshed. Let's ask ourselves the question, why did it happen in that way? And do you have some insights in that?
Well, my thought is that in just about every country, this phenomenon has occurred in the same way. That is, very strong pressure from the people themselves, very much enlivened by their faith, whether it be Catholic faith in Czechoslovakia and Poland, whether it be primarily the Lutheran faith in East Germany. Mm-hmm. But very much the people from below pushing strongly in the streets, and gentle and quiet pressure from above, from Mr. Gorbachev, in the sense that the local government knows that he is not going to send in troops to aid a government, a hardline government, to keep control. So I think these two factors have been operative in every instance. Now, why Mr. Gorbachev is so disposed and how he got to be that way is another interesting issue, but I'm sure we'll get there later in the discussion.
Okay. All right. Rudy, what's your feeling?
Yeah, I also think, that it, of course, has something to do with perestroika, restructuring, right? And perestroika is a revolution from above. It is a revolution against the counter-revolution of Brezhnev. It is a repetition of the Khrushchev revolution, which was directed against the counter-revolution of Stalinism, which was directed against the revolution of Lenin, and so on. So perestroika is deeply based in the last years of Lenin. It is a renewal of what the already mortally ill Lenin had in mind, particularly the idea of peaceful coexistence. And so this revolution from above now gets this massive grassroots support from below, and I think you are right that these two pressures, namely from above and from below, namely from above to do away with the Stalinistic or Brezhnev-oriented man in Berlin and East Germany, and then, of course, the pressure from below, which was demanded by the perestroika, that there must be a revolution from below too. Otherwise, you don't have enough steam to do these things. And I think, symbolically, the Berlin Wall is an expression of this double revolution.
Now, what about an organization that quite often is looked at askance here in our own country, namely the pressure of the labor unions? Isn't it true that Solidarity ought to get some credit, and that the labor union movement in Poland particularly, because after all, it basically has begun in Poland, hasn't it? That was the first. That was before the Berlin Wall started to come down.
Indeed, I feel very strongly that besides the economic woes of his own country, Gorbachev has been forced also by the phenomenon of the irrepressibility, if you will, of Solidarity in Poland. In 1984, Father Popiewishko was really martyred for trying to teach the people about their human rights and their human dignity. And while certainly I don't think Mr. Gorbachev had anything to do with that, he certainly had to do with the attempts of General Jaruzelski to crush Solidarity. Jaruzelski did it precisely to avoid a Soviet invasion 5 years ago. But I think the irrepressibility of Solidarity over the years, plus his own economic woes, has put Mr. Gorbachev, who's very reasonable and very pragmatic, in this position. I also think he has some humane tendencies. But as Wałęsa said when he visited Rome to the Pope, you are the heart and soul of Solidarity. I think that if the Pope had been assassinated in 1980, I don't think solidarity would have survived, and perhaps history would have taken a different course. So I think that Pope John Paul has a very strong hand in all of this, and I think that can be affirmed by the phenomenon of his visits to other countries where within 6 months after his visit there has been a nonviolent removal of a dictator, for instance, Chile or Haiti or the Philippines.
Well, it's interesting, and I think you certainly are in the area of real possibility that the role of the Pope is very significant here. Now, in Eastern Germany, as you already indicated, that's not as heavily Roman Catholic a country. Right. The Lutheran spirit is more evident there. But I suspect that there's one other area that must be given consideration, particularly in when you ask the question, why did the Berlin Wall come down? And that is that TV. When you think of the fact that the people in East Germany who have TVs are able to peek in to see what life is like in the West, its affluence and all of its goodies that make life more comfortable, and the freedom that is there, that must have had a tremendous impact on the, in a sense, enslaved people of East Germany. So I think you have to give credit to television as well.
Oh, I think very much so. Yeah. But again, the availability, the accessibility of that television is also part of the process, so there's a chicken and egg issue here too. But the media, this is a perfect example of the power of the media for good.
For good, right.
Which we don't see that much of, I don't think, in this country too often. It's the power of the media for sleaze.
Dr. Siebert, as a professor of religion, you, of course, have never talked to Gorbachev, but do you have any feelings? Is this man a humanist in the good sense of the word? Is this man a person who has some instincts for compassion and for openness? Or are you a little suspicious yet and wondering, well, what's behind all of this? How do you look upon Gorbachev as a human being?
I think one thing we must be clear of, if we think, and this comes up sometimes, you know, that this means a return to bourgeois conditions or to capitalism and so on, that would be a very dangerous type of an illusion. I mean, he is a Leninist, and he makes clear that there is no return to the ownership of the means of production, no return to the private appropriation of collective surplus labor, and so on. So it's all clear. So if anybody thinks, you know, that's the end of socialism or whatever, that would be a great illusion. But I mean, when Lenin was mortally ill in the last years after he had been assassinated, an assassination attempt, and so on, there were certain things, meaningful things, humanistic elements, which now Gorbachev has inherited, I would say. And in that sense, he is genuine, I would say. So,
how do you feel, Bob, about the authenticity of Gorbachev and this seeming openness to the freedom of the human spirit?
I was very, very skeptical until one particular thing happened, and that is that he univocally, after publicly brushing off a remark made by the Pope vis-a-vis a potential visit to Russia, he very coldly brushed it off with a publicly released telegram. Within months, unilaterally, he restored to the See of Vilna, the capital of Lithuania, the Roman Catholic bishop who had been in prison. Unilaterally, he restored him, gave him back the cathedral, gave the church back the property, and so on, and then invited one of the most charismatic Polish bishops in northeastern Poland to go on a pastoral visit through Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, during which time that bishop confirmed 5,000 young people, during which time the people of those countries joined hands across the three countries. Now, certainly he has made some gestures toward religious liberty unilaterally that would be so against his own self-interest, if he were trying to pull a fast one, as it were, that it would be irrational. So I am very impressed by him. And also when I see the look on the face of a man like President Cossiga in Italy, who stood with him this morning. Cossiga is a giant. Spiritually, intellectually, statesmanship-wise, he is a giant. And he was deeply moved to be in the man's presence, and that says a lot to me, too.
Rudy, as a historian, you're seeing great changes in East Germany, in Poland, in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia. Bulgaria seems to be somewhat different. Do you have any insight into
Romania?
Romania.
Yeah.
Romania.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the next domino
Well,
to topple, or are they going to hold up?
It is different. You know, perestroika hits different every country. If it is Cuba or if it is Romania. Romania has two things. One is that they think, you know, capitalism and social justice are incompatible. So therefore they don't want to have any glasnost opening up or whatever. The other thing is that they paid their debts back. You see?
Yes, 11 billion.
That means they liberated themselves from capitalism by paying the debts back. Yugoslavia has $19 billion debts. Poland has $39 billion debt. But Valencia just got the money, you know, will be enough for the paying of interest for 1 year or so. So these are the reasons. Now in Cuba, what Castro says is we never had a Brezhnev counter-revolution, we never had a Stalinistic counter-revolution, why do we need a new revolution or so? But when Gorbachev was in Cuba, he would say, for instance, that the labor unions in Cuba don't stand up adequately for their workers against socialistic managers and so on. So they need a perestroika as well. But I would say that most East Bloc states will follow it, you know, under the pressure from below. But there will be some people who think they don't need it. You see, the same thing in El Salvador, for instance, where the revolution is just in coming. And in Nicaragua, where the counter-revolution of the Contras, you know, has been beaten. So in every country, you have a different situation, and they will react differently.
Do you have any observations? I'm kind of curious, honestly, as to why we've heard nothing from within Yugoslavia. I wonder if it's because you have 8 states there who are so deeply different from one another that they're more concerned with their own local disagreements and problems.
And hasn't there been a bit more openness there anyway?
Well, I mean, Yugoslavia doesn't belong to the Warsaw Pact, first of all, you know, that's one thing.
Yeah.
And then the Stalinistic experience, the bad ones, you know, are very strong there. And then they went an extra way anyway. They may think we were always perestroika. They had it all the time, you see. So that is another.
Was Romania, by the way, Roman Catholic in, say, before World War II?
I think so,
yeah,
sure.
Yeah,
That
I
was
think so, yeah.
the prevailing religion.
Sure, and
Yeah.
their language is still one of the closest to classical Latin
I see.
of
But
all.
it's interesting that apparently the church is still definitely being persecuted and harassed
Oh,
in Romania,
and
Albania much worse.
Much worse.
Much worse indeed.
I did find, though, that Yugoslavia was a country of great sadness and oppression when I was
Is
there
that
the
right?
last time.
I think most
It's
Americans
also
think of it as being
Great
somewhat
religious
open.
struggles, you see.
Yes.
Somehow the Orthodox Church takes up, you know, the Serbian interests and therefore has opened up an offensive practically against Roman Catholicism. Even the communists would say this time it isn't the fault of the Roman Catholics, it comes from the other side.
I found the Polish people much happier in their oppression, even before the
Is that right?
Solidarity victory. Much more happy on the streets and much more positive about their life than I really did find the people in Yugoslavia so depressed and down in the dumps that it hurt.
Is that right?
And of course,
Yeah.
their currency and economic situation is also
Yeah,
very
inflation
bad.
is horrible, yeah.
Let me ask you a moment about Poland. It's closely related to the whole question of the coming down the wall in Berlin. I read somewhere that the approximately 100,000 Protestants in Poland have had it better under the most recent regime than beforehand, and partly because for the regime, anything that was anti-Roman Catholic was given a bit of an advantage. What will happen, do you think, if there is a closer relationship or a greater freedom for the Roman Catholic Church? Will that impact negatively on Protestants in Poland? Will they have the kind of freedom in an overwhelming Roman Catholic country that we have here as Protestants and Catholics together? What's your feeling on that?
Well, I think they will, basically. I think it will feel differently because the country is so overwhelmingly Roman Catholic. But the new Prime Minister, Mazowiecki, was a member of the intellectual circle with Pope John Paul II when he was Archbishop of Krakow. And if he stands for anything, he stands for religious liberty and the sense of the affirmation, the provision of space for people to make their own
that's good to hear.
institutional religious commitments.
Because historically that's not been true in
So
Poland.
Mazowiecki himself, I would think, would be a great promoter, really, of religious liberty, precisely as it's understood in the Second Vatican Council decree. I would think that they would be quite safe.
This is a widespread phenomenon, by the way, you know, when religions fought against each other before communism, since there's no state church anymore, somehow, suddenly we have 12 Protestant groups in Yugoslavia who were never allowed to be in there before, either by Roman Catholicism or by the Orthodox Church. So this is a very strange paradox, that an atheistic type of a government suddenly produces new conditions.
Yes, and probably for the wrong reasons. Only
Yeah.
because it was against the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, it's a
and,
rejection of state churches.
But you feel there will be religious liberty in a country that is so completely dominated by the Roman Catholic Church?
Yes, I think it'll be a funny kind. For example, in the area back east where I grew up, there are literally 97% Roman Catholics, 3% other. And the other are usually mainline Protestant churches, Presbyterian, Methodist, so on. When Pope John Paul II came to Philadelphia, those Protestant churches ran their own buses down to see our Holy Father. There's a certain way in which, when people are overwhelmed by the presence of another religion in terms of numbers, they pick up certain kind of cultural accretions from that. Just as Catholics locally pick up certain cultural accretions that are very definitely Protestant. For example, to have a funeral in the afternoon. Now, you would never see that in largely Catholic populated areas on the East Coast. That's an unheard of phenomenon. It's impossible. It's unthinkable. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with having a funeral in the afternoon. But here, where it's much more common among our Protestant brothers and sisters, culturally, we do that. The same with tithing. As I said, this is a real blessing for us. The per capita income of Catholics back east is far less than it is in areas where there is a heavily Protestant population. So
Let's go back to
profit
Berlin.
from that.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, the wall is down,
Yes.
figuratively. Now, what must be our reaction in the Western world to that, and how will it impact on all of our life? After all, that wall has been the symbol of the division between these two large ideologies, these two significant ideologies. With the tearing down of the wall, how will that impact on us here?
Well, first of all, the wall is not entirely down because the mayor of East Berlin doesn't want to come down because they have very little AIDS and they're afraid of more. They have very little crime. They're afraid of more, and so on. Therefore, they would like to keep it as it is, except these entrances. But I think it is important for the future that one looks, first of all, about the past, how it came about. They built the wall, you see. But you know that I was a prisoner of war here and was trained to democratize West Germany. And we were the ones who built the West German state first, long before there was an East German state. And we built the NATO first, long before there was a Warsaw Pact and so on. So these things, these memories come up very much with Gorbachev now, you see. So therefore, yesterday the plan to reunite Berlin and Germany by Kohl were rejected in East Germany and in Russia because Kohl brought up the Adenauer issue again, where Stalin offered the reunion of the city and Germany if it would be neutralized, both parts. And of course Adenauer said no neutralization, but elections and so on. So again, Kohl raised the thing of elections, but the other question that both Germanies and both part of Berlin belong to different defense blocks, you see, is that is the great obstacle. So therefore, I think it is in Gorbachev terms possible only a reunion of Germany if it is the home of all Europeans, our common home, as he calls that. That means that East and West Europe will be united, NATO and Warsaw Pact will be dismantled and so on. And now the question is, sometimes he talks about, from Ural to the Atlantic. Now, does he include Russia into this? Or is Poland, for instance, part of it, but Russia stays out? All this is not very clear. But I think that progress can be made with the wall and with Germany only in the wider European context. And there the Pope, of course, has also a wide European, Eastern, Western European plan. When they meet tomorrow in Rome, I think that will be one of the connections between them.
How do you feel? What's going to be the impact? Let's assume for a moment that wall will be porous if it doesn't come down entirely. That some of that pressure that existed there will be gone. How is that going to impact on, for example, our defense budget and our expenditures in the country?
It simply is, it's almost apocalyptic to think of what would happen. I mean, the dismantling of both the Warsaw Pact and NATO would be such a blessing for the world. It would be such a major step toward the kind of serious peacemaking that all people of goodwill have been, you know, pressing for years and years and years. But I think that, you know, there'd be many, many interesting kind of side effects of it all in the religious sphere. I think people will think about the world differently if there's no Berlin Wall.
Yeah, that's become a symbol of
Two
division,
months
after all.
ago, really part of what defined the world for me was that.
Sure.
If you take that away, I will think about the whole world differently. If I think about the whole world differently, I will think about the universal church differently, and I will think about what's going on here locally very differently.
Yeah,
and I can't even predict all of the implications, but I know that they're going to be mind-boggling and that this is just going to be a spectacular time to be alive.
We will have our own perestroika, our own restructuring, you know, and I think specifically in the East they add now formal human rights to the material human rights, right, like traveling and striking and so on. We could, for instance, you know, add material human rights to the formal ones, you know. That means the right to work, the right to clothing, the right to housing, and so on, which we never formulated. So that means what happens over there should, and I think will, have to be reciprocated. If the weapon industry goes down, we have to, of course, transform this investment into peaceful
Yeah, it would be
things.
marvelous if those billions that are being spent today for armaments to destroy one another could be used in social programs to help.
Exactly,
And maybe a kind of a second Marshall Plan might be a possibility for Western Europe and for Eastern Europe. But it's interesting that we have a tendency to look at these things very personally. I was struck by the fact that on the day after the wall was breached, that one of the guards was interviewed, and he was very pessimistic, and he said, but the essence was, I don't like this because what's going to happen to my job? He won't be standing there with a gun to keep people from crossing. He's going to lose his job. Now, that's in microcosm what's happening here in this country with the big defense industry. The stocks have gone down already, and the people are very worried about their jobs. And so it's going to make an impact, the coming down of the wall. But how wonderful it would be if some of that energy could be now used for a positive thing.
Transportation, for instance, right? Yeah.
Sure.
Another thing that will come out of this, not directly related to the wall, but more related to the perhaps the encounter of the Pope with Gorbachev, will be, I think, a more speedy movement toward the first real structural ecumenical reunion with the Orthodox. I think that's been at the top of the Pope's agenda ecumenically since he became Pope. And a real openness, a real access to the Orthodox Church in Russia, not as controlled by the government, but as an independent church by our own authorities, will allow for a quantitative leap forward and a qualitative leap forward in the ecumenical dialogue that's going to be very significant.
By the time our program is aired, the summit will be passed. But isn't that one of the items that people think is on the agenda of the Pope, namely that there be some discussion about the standing of the Roman Catholic Church, particularly in the Ukraine?
Yes, exactly, and there should be legalization.
And he will visit, his visit will be discussed. He will go to the Soviet Union. He will also go to Cuba, and there are also preparation for it. So
now, I remember my congregation said to me last Sunday that, and this is since the Berlin Wall came down and a lot of this other openness, that a friend of his was in Russia with a group, and the group was harassed and told in no uncertain terms that they were not to try it again. They sang a hymn, as this is a choir group touring the country, they sang a hymn in a public square, and that caused considerable tension and stress. So this member of my congregation said, don't talk too much yet about the openness that's over there. There are still repressions. It's still a dictatorship. It's still an atheistic country. Are we perhaps jumping to too big a conclusion here? Is Gorbachev motivated more by the disaster in the economic situation there than anything else?
well, I would say, first of all, he will not allow the privatization of the means of production or something like this, and he remains an atheist, you see. But in his understanding, atheism is the negation of theism, which is estrangement of man from himself, and so on. That's how he sees it, you know. And the affirmation which comes out of this double negation is humanism. So he's what you call a secular humanist, right? And there is no sign of any conversion or something like this. He goes to the Pope because he hopes that the Pope will be a factor in the peace movement, that the Pope will be not only a NATO bishop, and the Pope doesn't want to be only a NATO bishop, he wants to be Catholic, universal. So there is again a connection which the two have when they meet.
So one could also hope that Khrushchev may come to scoff, but remain to pray in this confrontation with the Pope. Who knows?
Yeah,
You're rather skeptical about any sort of internal change in the life of...
Well, grace can do everything.
Grace can do everything,
We just
right.
talk in human terms,
Yeah.
and he is firmly rooted in his Leninism.
See, I
And,
guess I'm obviously not an expert in this, but I can't say I've ever read so much about what you're saying, that he is so thoroughly committed to atheism, first of all, and to that there be no private industry or private property and so
Well,
on.
there's the book, Perestroika, right, where he lays it all out.
Okay, all right.
1987.
Okay.
It says it very step by step. All what you see happening in Czechoslovakia, in East Germany, Poland, and so on, is all there.
But it's certainly a day of great opportunity for Christianity.
I think myself that too, I would agree with Rudy, but I think that too, he is very limited in what he's able to tolerate. You know, I do think that 4 years ago there would have been no talk whatsoever of a papal visit, and now it's obviously on the docket. I think he's been very carefully removing certain obstacles that otherwise might have removed him, and that he's got to pace himself in what is publicly tolerated in word and in action and so on, and I think he's very clever at that. I cannot believe the skill with which he has removed his opposition.
How serious do you think is his problem in his own country, internally? Does he have the support, do you think, of the majority of the Russian people?
Yes, I mean, but there is an opposition, right? There are the conservatives there in the military and so on. And if this doesn't work out, this revolution, it will be followed by a counter-revolution, right? Like Stalin followed Lenin, Brezhnev followed Khrushchev, and so on. That's the danger. There's even the, let's see, it would dissolve socialism. There's even the fascist possibility, you know. And of course, one thing we have to know, you see, if it would go into a fascist authoritarianism or dictatorship again, or into a new socialistic one like Stalin, it would lower our life expectancy, you see, because the whole coldness of the relationship would increase again. And Gorbachev says in this book, for instance, there are 200 reactors in West Germany, you know, even conventional weapons would blow up the whole continent, you know, and us with it. And it would not inhabitable for centuries or
Right.
so. I think the main thing with him is, you know, what Einstein once said, with the splitting of the atom, everything has changed except our consciousness. I think Gorbachev has made a decisive step forward to change our consciousness.
There is a cynical comment made by Stalin once that how many divisions does the Pope have? How many does he have? Now, not literally now, but the Pope is coming into this dialogue, this confrontation, this situation with some divisions, right?
Well, the Gorbachev needs the Pope to come to Russia to
the Pope
quiet
is a great moral force.
To quiet things in the Baltic republics and in the Ukraine where Catholicism is very strong. He can put the brakes on the way he did in Poland. He can say, wait, you know, this cannot be built in a day just like Rome. And it's ironic that the two of them, in a certain sense, need one another for the accomplishment of their vision.
That's interesting.
As the Pope moves toward, you know, his own ecumenical vision in terms of his role as pastor, Gorbachev is moving toward his own vision in terms of perestroika. They need one another. It's very, very interesting.
Well, thanks to both of you. We've had a discussion about that wall. It's not totally down, but it certainly has been altered, and we can be very thankful for that development. And I appreciate your insightful comments on this subject that's of interest to all of us as members of our community. And friends, we'd like to invite you to tune in again next week to another broadcast of Markings.